My dad died when I was young, and as the oldest of my siblings I became the man of the house, the strength. I'm convinced that difficult situations shape a man's character, and that's why I work so hard. What I'm about to tell you didn't happen to a friend or relative. I lived it. I am the main character in this story. To give you some context, I was born in Villa Union, a small town near the border with the province of Córdoba. There wasn't much work in the area. I would take whatever job I could to earn a few pesos. Doing 1,000 things, I ended up as a taxi driver. A little old car, worn out with its years and battles, which became my companion on a spring Sunday. I got a little trip from Villa Union to Cruz del Eje. I had to take a passenger to his relative's house. A nice trip, kind of long but well paid. The journey there was the smoothest. There were no setbacks on the road. The weather was a bit rough, with dark and heavy clouds, signaling that a storm was coming, and if you didn't speed up, you'd get stuck right in the middle of it. We reached the destination around midday. I filled up the tank and then back on the road. I was halfway through when the rain hit hard. It was impossible to drive. The car didn't have traction on the pavement. I don't know if the tires were too worn out or if the water made it impossible for the tires to grip the road. The point is that continuing on the road became impossible. I maneuvered the car and parked it on the shoulder. Right next to me were many thick trees, which served as a shield against the rain. The rain was still heavy, and it was at that moment I realized the following. At one point I fixed my gaze on the trees because something started to catch my attention. It looked like a blanket, a white sheet waving in the treetops. The sheet began to unfold down to the tree branches, all the way to the ground, and then I swallowed hard, tried to start the car, but the engine wouldn't turn on. What I thought was a sheet wasn't. It was something else, I'm not sure, but it was as if someone had removed a person's spine and only their skin remained. It was a piece of viscous, shapeless plasticine. It had the face, hands, and feet, but there was no real form to it because it was just stretched skin. It fell to the ground and began to crawl while screaming horribly. I started the car and got out of there without a second thought. When I arrived at the house, I took a shower, ate very little, and went to sleep. In the following days, the fear wore off and I became calmer, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Another time, I got a trip to Cruz del Eje. I drove to the spot where I had parked during the rain, found the trees, and got out to check. There, I found a memorial cross. It said that a very young girl had hung herself from the branches. I continued my journey, and while stopping to eat and fill up the tank, I asked the locals about the deceased. That's when I learned the sad story. She hung herself from the branch of a tree in springtime. The treetops were so dense that no one noticed her death. The heat of the spring and gravity made her. The body decomposed very quickly, the fluids drained down. When they found her, her limbs, torso, arms, and legs had stretched so much that they almost touched the ground. They called her La Larga because of the length of her body. Now you understand paranoia. The first contact back in 2017 was when she started a relationship. Want to know how she got there? Well, there's a secondary character, Eduardo Linen. I had been reading him since 2016 on a website with the same name, mine, El Rincon del Mal Tuerto con Tard. While playing PlayStation 4, Eduardo shared a Zelda game on his page, and that's where I first came across it. I'm a writer, and I left some of my writings for you to see my material, and if you like it, we should make some videos with them. Eduardo and Alvaro Ramos were already there. I was the third writer to join. In 7 years, the channel grew a lot, and the people behind it are also many. Antonio and I came up with a lot of great stories. Eternal Love, Love Without Limits, The Last Wish, and April Rush. However, the first hit from this Argentine-Mexican duo was one I titled Paranoia, a story that was released on the channel on January 1, 2018. My first contact with Sylvia and the events she lived through made me remember the events of the children from the ILF. If you're confused, I recommend you refresh your memory and listen to the mentioned story because now everything connects to that writing. 83 years old, and from time to time, the ideas he wove got lost and became disconnected. He needed help all the time to walk and do the simplest and easiest things. Yet the guy he knew Solia almost all the time. Thank you, I was with Miguel because it was almost time to meet the father. What crazy priest do you think? He was already a bit distanced from the church and mass with Gonzalo and Christian. However, he no longer participated as much as before. Mother Maria Elena had gone to Brazil, and the missionary brothers had returned to their native Chile. The youth group dissolved and no one gathered again. Only the little nuns were left, but before God, Maria Elena, the new mother, only specialized in meetings for girls. One afternoon after Mass, I stayed seated on a bench in the chapel, waiting for a woman to finish her confession. While I was sweetly waiting, Javier, the young man who helped the old priest, approached. Javier was a seminarian, and after many comings and goings he was appointed as the priest's caretaker, a job that seemed simple, but very complex at the same time. "Tell me, Javier, how's life in the religious world?" "It's nice, but it has its things," he replied while looking at the floor, sighing. "It's tough, it's complicated taking care of the Father, really, but it's not what you'd imagine. It's actually very complicated what happens around him." Javier told me that around the old priest, strange things always happened, that the caretakers, whether a nurse or an attendant, couldn't last many days, at most 3 or 4, and they would quit even though the pay was good. Countless people came and went, and the authorities of the diocese, tired of the resignations, decided to send one of their own to take care of him. Javier was the one chosen, and what happened? People say they see shadows, things that shouldn't exist, noises, lots of noises, especially of a dog barking and crying at times. And did you ever see anything? 2 things. The first time I saw it, it took the form of the Virgin. It was a dark and cold night. Back then, both of us lived at the church under the Father's care. I went to the altar to check if everything was closed, and then I realized that the statue of the Virgin was no longer in its place. The lights flickered, and then I saw her. She was standing a few meters away, and how was she? It was as if she were made of flesh and bone, but even though she had the most angelic face in the world, she was terrifying. I ran out of there and we went back to the Father. The statue of the Virgin was on the floor. Between the two of us, we set it back up. The Father began to pray and asked me to do the same, and we saw something else, something the size of a person but very dark. That person started moving its hands as if it were about to fly. We heard a heavy fluttering and a deep clucking sound. The Father prayed loudly, and that disappeared into the darkness. We walked to the spot where we had seen that thing. On the floor we found a bunch of black feathers. I was about to ask more about it, but just then the woman who had been confessing came out. "Look," Javier signaled for me to go with the Father. Past paranoia. Genesis. At the age of 14 I read my first contemporary horror novel, Here Lives the Horror by Anson J. The book, within its pages, narrates the events that took place in a house. Located at 112 Ocean Avenue, Ronald DeFeo and his family. Shortly after this, the Lutz family buys the property and moves into the house without knowing what had happened there. Anson's work details the precise supernatural events the Lutz family experiences during their stay in the Amityville house. It's a way of saying it was the first contemporary novel, as it came from a long list of classic horror books like Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mold, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and so on. If someone wants to be a writer, they must be a reader as a foundation. Hardcore is the only way. However, the first book I read completely at the tender age of 6 was the Bible. I didn't read it as religious reading but as a big book with many stories. When I got to the part of Revelation, the battle between good and evil blew my mind, thousands of metaphors, descriptions of the beast, the angels. This left a mark on me, I think. So, that's the main reason why I love to write stories related to demonology, demonic possessions, and the battle between good and evil, and precisely this story is one of them. After leaving Javier in the pews, you walked behind the altar through a long hallway that connected the different rooms. In one of those rooms, Mother Maria Elena used to give catechism classes. I arrived where the priest was, sat down, and we began to chat. "Hail Mary, most pure, conceived without sin. Tell me, boy, what brings you here?" "I'm not going to give details of all my sins. We'll skip ahead about 15 minutes. Where's the good part, Father? If it doesn't seem disrespectful." "I'd love to know." His story: "Actually, I was a catechist in this chapel with a little nun, and something happened to us in this cathedral." "You really want to know?" "Yes," I answered while sharpening my senses and preparing the phone's hard recorder. "I was born in 1933 in Guadacolol, a small town in the interior of the province. Unlike others who felt the calling from a very young age, my calling came when I was older, at 21. That was when God knocked on the doors. My life was fading. I'm sorry, but I'm at peace. I'll keep going until my soul fades. Ordained in 1962, when I turned 50, I went to Rome, and Benedict XVI gave me a special recognition. It wasn't the first time I'd been to Rome. I had already gone before to learn how to fight against the one below." "And how was that?" "Just as the one above chooses his own, the one below chooses as well. We all have a guardian angel, and there's also a guardian demon, one that is waiting for us at all times. I don't know my angel, but I do know my demon. Mother Maria Elena told me something about you, that you are an exorcist. And honestly, I want you to tell me what you think about the following story I wrote. It's based on an incident from a friend of my brother. Look, I know the girl, and I also know what's bothering her. The girl used to live very close to here, just past Santa Rosa Avenue. I don't know if it's exactly as described in the story. I only saw one of them. Smelling